Chapter 2 Something Awakens Me. Randy asked me if I wanted to go on a camping trip one day while on a job. He said it was time for a vacation. He also informed me his friend Ron wanted to go. I guess Randy finally thought, after a year of working, that we needed a vacation. But I found out later he had a hidden agenda also. We all had chosen and agreed on the place where we would go camping and the logistics involved going there and the supplies needed for several days. So knowing where we were going and the fact that it was a mineral-rich part of the country, I studied the geology of the area. What I studied quickly at the library in my spare time was mostly about mining gems and gold there, and some of the history of the area. I always wanted to go to these places to see the country. I read a lot of Argosy magazines, Field and Stream, which mostly was about the lost gold history, stories. However, I knew that they had to be somewhat embellished. We prepared in advance for the trip, but at the last minute, Randy canceled, saying it had to do something with his bitch of a girlfriend. So Ron asked if I would go anyway, and I said I would. I was staying at Randy's apartment, and I needed a break from his bitchy girlfriend myself. From where we lived in Rialto to the spot we chose to camp at was about 600 to 700 miles north into the southern Cascades and the Yola-Bola area, and was just south of the Trinity Alps region. We were just east of a place called Forest Glen, and north from there is where we went to camp out, and where I was going to prospect. It was sometime in April, around the 12th, and down in Southern California it was getting quite hot. So we figured that the weather would be similar up north, but as it turned out, we were quite mistaken. Those elevations are unpredictable in many ways. There, each 500 foot of elevation has a different climate and environment. When we drove off the highway finally and headed north 9 miles in on a dirt road in a forest preserve and several hundred feet up in elevation, we ran out of road at that point because the snowpack was still there and deep. What we found was it had snowed the night before, and there was about 8 inches or more of fresh snow on top of existing snow, almost the same depth as the packed snow. We decided we wouldn't push it with the car, so we stopped and we parked off the side of the road where it was safe to park without blocking the road. The spot we selected to camp at was at least 14 miles from there. There was a year-round creek there, and if we were going to camp, we needed to get there before any more bad weather set in and before dark. Seeing that there was about a foot or more of fresh snow on the ground where we parked, Ron said, "I guess that ends our camping trip, so now what do we do?" I hadn't figured on that response. I thought about it for a couple of minutes and said we should start to go there and find our spot near the creek as soon as we can. If we leave now, we should get there around dusk. "Are you crazy?" he said dramatically. I replied, "Well, maybe. But I was trained to do this, and I have no fear of camping on the snow. I had already made up my mind to do this. Snow wasn't going to change my mind now." I never expected that reaction from him, but he came around after I explained all of my military experience. All I could finally say was, "Trust me, we'll be okay. This will be fun, and besides, if we crest this mountain, the snow might not be where we're going to camp." No way did I want to turn back, not after that drive. I wanted to see the mountains of California. I told him, if you listen to what I instruct you to do and follow my lead, we'll have a great time. At the same time, I was thinking to myself, I don't want to stay in a motel in some tiny town just to go home in a few days after that long drive. I had no fear. I wanted to test myself, and I had wanted to see the mountains of California up close for quite some time. When a chance comes along, you have to take it. Reading those stories in adventure magazines in the past about the hidden gold and gems became my motivation to do this. My friends' motivation were to find a spot to grow weed, which I learned about before I left, but I didn't care. That was their hidden agenda. I had my own reasons. I had been working for a year straight without any breaks. I was getting nowhere monetarily. I couldn't change my situation and I never really seen any money from Randy. My cash came from unenjoyment from Indiana, unemployment. And that wasn't going to last much longer. I thought this might be the only chance to at least see the real country here in California up close. It was also now a perfect way and place to escape him and his girlfriend while I figured out what to do. I tried to figure out how to find gold or gems to escape them both, and if successful or not, I even contemplated going back home to Indiana. I had a lot to think about, and this was a perfect place to meditate on my future. You know how it goes living with others, especially if one is a bitch. Excuse me. Then there was a possibility that we might encounter something dangerous here, since the names of certain places were named Bear Wallow, Cougar Gulch, and Rattlesnake Creek. We would be walking by those places soon. I had a pistol, so bears and mountain lions weren't as much an issue or distraction at this time. Protection gives you a false sense of security, and out there in that country, anything can go wrong. Before we left the car, I planned lunch near Bear Gulch. I examined the map. It was a halfway point to the camp spot, and all three places were close together near the halfway point. So somewhere along there, we would stop, rest, and eat. I now had to train somebody quickly and on the fly, but he was a good study. So there wasn't a problem. We all had the gear we needed. We only had to re-prepare ourselves in packs for the change in the weather. I showed him what we needed to take and what to leave. I lined us out before we left our town, and I was right about all the gear we brought with us. I had correctly anticipated all the possibilities. I was trained well while in the Army, and now it was second nature. We changed into heavier coats, and we put on an extra pair of socks and changed into our rubber boots. I studied the map, set my compass, then when I had looked at the map enough, we set out. We proceeded down the road and left the car and all civilization far behind. I can't even describe the feeling. The immediate sense of true freedom was overwhelming. This was the most beautiful countryside I had ever seen anywhere, and we were as free as could be. The wilderness just absorbed us, and we were now a part of it. As we walked deeper in, there were no outside influences at all now. It was just us and nature. The air was crisp, cold, and fresh, and every breath I took was visible and resembled smoke as I exhaled. All the pines, oaks, and fir trees had frozen ice around the branches and the limbs. They were luminous with crystals of ice, and at the ends of the branches, the weight of the snowy ornaments was pulling them downward. It was like Christmas, with Christmas trees everywhere you looked. The silence was overwhelming, and the air continually became cooler as we walked higher up in elevation. Every breath proved it. Higher up, the wind picked up ever so slightly, and every now and then ice and snow would fall to the ground from the heights of the trees. You could hear it happen. Most of it was muffled but dramatic. At first, we didn't know what was causing the sounds, so that made us turn to look to see where those questionable noises were coming from. This would happen many times during this hike. We had to look. It was instinct. Those animal names were in my head now, and I've forgotten for the moment that there were wolves up here too. Then the super weird came to mind. This was also Bigfoot country and was well known for that also. So I kept alert continuously. I was the only one with a weapon. We walked through and past beautiful areas. We also came across areas that were clear-cut by the logging companies that were obviously operating sometime in the near past without too many regulations. As we walked through these areas, there was a sort of dread of desolation in the warlike appearance of those places. It was depressing and reminded me of war, but at the same time, still so pretty somehow, with the cover of white pristine snow on that ground. This reminded me the way civilization is, and thinks without a thought or regard about the future. As we walked further and deeper in, we re-entered unaffected parts of the old-growth forest, and it would finally stay that way for the rest of the hike. Then, at about 3 hours in, we decided to eat something and rest for a while right where I thought we would be, Bear Gulch. We broke out some tuna and crackers, and I showed him how to bury the trash. I quickly found out, though, it wasn't easy to do in this terrain. The ground was frozen, but we did the best that we could. I thought as we left, we hid it well enough if enemy soldiers were the issue, but animals could sniff it out pretty easily. I said nothing of my thoughts and kept it to myself so as not to ruin Ron's experience. I knew what the possibilities might be if the latter happened because of where we were. We had walked for a long while. I checked the map and compass every now and then because there were roads that were intersecting our route, and I didn't want to make a mistake. Started getting colder now as the day passed into late afternoon, and I knew we wouldn't get there till around dark, which still wasn't really a problem as the moon was going to be up soon and would illuminate the snow somewhat. We were now where the streets have no names. They were only numbered, and only terrain near them had names on the map, like Bear Gulch and those other scary spots, which were far behind now. In a few more hours we could set up a camp. Ron questioned me. Why were we going so far? Can't we camp near here somewhere? His tiredness showed on his face. I told him we didn't have far to go now. Hang on. Our plan was to camp in an area where we would have access to water since we would be out there for 8 days. And now 2 of the days would involve hiking in and out because we walked further than planned. We would get to see some awesome places and scenic routes from that campsite. It was my idea to do some prospecting while there. I was desperate for a reason to move from Southern California, and now I knew I wouldn't mind living here. But I wasn't sure how to do that unless I got lucky, and after really thinking about it, I would need some kind of job near here. That would be a tough one to accomplish. I had no training in anything related to this kind of country, which would have been with the timber industries. We arrived at our location at Nofus Creek at about 8 o'clock at night. We found a spot best suited for the weather and for the placement of our tent. From just above Norfolk's Creek, we could still set out on hikes to see the area up close. So we set up and made a big fire and ate again, then later talked and sipped some rum while we checked out the stars. And then he thanked me for pushing him on. He had thought that we would not have made or maneuvered so precisely to the spot in the darkness. And at several points of time during the hike, he had become apprehensive, tired, and wanted to stop for the night. But now he was happy. We had to go this far because all the surveys, pardon me, we had to go this far because all the surveys I read about stated that this was the beginning of the high mineral content that I wanted to check out. Ron didn't know anything about that, so we talked about that too. The stars in the Milky Way were absolutely the clearest he and I ever seen. I have never seen such clear skies anywhere, and as we found out later, this country was stunningly beautiful during the daytime, even more so. On that first night, I kept getting the sense of being watched, but there were no signs of humans, nor did we see any big animals on the way in, only the occasional deer tracks, and definitely no tire tracks. It didn't take long to fall asleep here, but the silence was unusual to get used to, but that was soon overridden by fatigue. The next day we looked around, but we were limited as to where we could go. We decided to go as far as Plummer Creek, which was west of our camp and on the other side of Norfolk Creek. Above Plummer Creek was a cliff area where we could see for miles. But at this time of the year, we would have to be careful. There was a danger of sliding off and falling from those cliffs. There I found what I was looking for. Bedrock with lots of calcites and quartz veins, yellowish clay banks. This happened to be the perfect place to look for gemstones and gold, but for an amateur, it was tough this time of year. But I did secure a couple geoids. There were no signs of human activity in that area or anywhere near us at this time. From there and from the cliffs, it was about 20 miles through a valley with no roads, a really big valley, all the way to the South Fork of the Trinity River. 20 more miles north downstream to the next town around the mountain range to our right and north of our position. That was the closest town, Heimpalm. What a beautiful sight to see. That night, we ate, talked, drank some more rum. We again made a great big fire. Around 8 or so in the evening, Ron remarked, "I wish I would have remembered to bring a radio." I said something to the effect that we didn't need one, because I'd been listening to the creek below play its own music for a while. I had been hearing it for about 2 hours now. He said, "Yeah, that's nice," in a dismissive tone. I said, "No, really, it's playing real music. There's a rhythm and a beat with certain instruments playing music." I had not said anything about it till now. I thought he was hearing it also, but I was wrong. It was so clear I couldn't resist it anymore. I had to speak up. He brought up the lack of a radio, and I was wondering if it was just me. I was now questioning my own sanity, so I had to mention it because in all of my excursions, I never experienced anything like it. There was a regular creek water noise till about 6 p.m., but developed into a more complicated pattern of rhythms. It started slowly at first, then it became clear to me as having a radio playing everything from classical to rock, some blues, then it would go into Christmas songs, and it seemed that these holiday songs were favored along with gospel music. But it would play everything you could imagine. The only thing that was missing was the vocals or voices. I asked him again, the third night, because it was driving me crazy that he didn't hear this, and he said, no, not really. I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe this. I said, after a song change, okay, let me sing the words. So I sang along with the rest of the music. Can't tell you what it was now, but at that exact moment he jumped up and said, oh my God, I can't believe it. I was relieved that I wasn't so crazy now, finally. I knew music, and I played a bass and a rhythm guitar, so I understood the theory and could read notes. I could read them and play them, so I recognized what it was with ease when I heard it. It was the strangest thing I ever witnessed. We didn't need a radio. I know what you're going to say, it was the rum. We only brought a pint each, and it wasn't enough to hallucinate with. We made the rum last for days. We stayed up late at night listening all we could. We listened to the music amazed and wondered how it could be possible. We figured out after several days that this would start around 6 in the evening and stop about 3 in the morning. It was so clear to us both that we traced it back to the creek, and when we got too close to the water, it would dissipate into pure water noise. We were not able to tell if it was drowning out the music from a distant source or drowning it out because we were too close to the source. It was very odd. The music changed tempo with the flow or speed of the water. As it changed, it also changed its selection. We tried to convince ourselves that the music was coming from some distant source because it was so strange. There had to be somebody nearby who was playing music from a radio or maybe a tape player. We were almost sure, trying to convince ourselves it had to be from some other source. On about the 4th day of hearing this, we decided to hike in a circle around the camp to see if we could track the source. I was trained to track the enemy in the army, so now we had an unusual mission to keep us busy. This bizarre event also kept us out there longer than we wanted to stay. We backtracked the road we came in on, then checking the other directions we realized there were no fresh tire tracks or signs of humans on foot either, hunting or camping. We found no signs of anyone. What we did find was that a cougar had tracked us in. It had followed us on the road to where we had set up our camp, and we never knew how close he had been to us till then. It had observed us from a very close proximity, which amazed me because I sensed it. We followed the tracks back for a mile, plus we figured there was no way anyone would drive in anywhere near us, even with 4-wheel drive. We walked this road in, and I knew we didn't see those tracks on the way in. These would have been noticeable even in the dark on the snow. What I knew was this was a very large cat that followed us in. The prints were huge. It had to be about 200 pounds or more. These weren't there on the way in. The opposite direction from the camp, a road intersected the main road that we walked in on. It goes to the left, heads about a half a mile to the cliffs. No tracks there. And that road dead ends at Plumber's Creek. If you go the other closest town, past the cliff road, on the main dirt road, it's 18 miles of town, and you have to go over and up a summit, over Tule Creek Summit, and then down about 12 miles till you hit Hayfork. We walked about 6 miles down the main dirt road, number 7 and 14, to Indian Valley. No signs or tracks of any kind except deer. We were convinced that we would spot something, but no one had been there for months. Not with a 12-inch covering of fresh snow on top of more hardened snow and ice. I would not even try it with four-wheel drive and chains. This place was cut off. We were puzzled. We were convinced, because of the clarity of the music, that it was being reproduced by electronics, but we found no evidence to indicate that at all. The area of the creek where the music seemed to come from seemed to be surreal, the pulsing in a rhythm. The creek wasn't totally frozen over and was open in many places. There were small falls and pooling caused by the ice and snow melting slightly, then slightly refreezing. What we couldn't figure out is why it played so clearly and precisely, and we tried to convince ourselves that the gurgling and dribblings through the creek system within our hearing range was what we were hearing. I asked Ron what he thought. He theorized and said, "I think the music might be drifting up from the town of Heimpalm via the creek itself and the Trinity River, but the distance is so far, and there are thousands upon thousands of trees, rocks, boulders, and all that snow. How could that be?" "It can't." I also said, agreeing. That sound would have to travel around all of those obstacles. That's 30 miles or more like 40. Those obstacles would surely block and absorb all sounds originating from there. If it was coming from, let's say, a bar, why aren't we hearing it in the daytime? Plus, we are hearing gospel and Christmas songs in April. We are in a national forest. No one lives out here, and the maps don't show any forest stations near here. He agreed and said, "You're right," and came up with this. "From what I learned in geology class about earthquakes is that earthquakes are happening all the time, every day, and humans can't sense them or anything below 2 on the Richter scale." He went on, "The creek could be acting as an amplifier, and for it to happen with a beat and a rhythm, let alone copying most of the instruments in correct tempos, seems too unbelievable. So yes, I am puzzled and amazed." He asked me, "What do you think, Mike?" I said, music is also vibrations at certain frequencies. As far as I could tell with all our investigating, the creek was playing music, but it couldn't sing, so that's another thing. We never hear vocals. I also said, well, we are in God's country, as its county slogan suggests, and from what I have witnessed, it is God's country. Besides, the music is right below the hill we are camped on. So no matter how much I don't want to believe that, it is a fact, so go and figure. As the next day or two passed, we sang to its music. It became a game, and I remember that it seemed gospel music and Christmas carols were played repeatedly, and Amazing Grace seemed to be favored because we sang it many times and more than once in a night. It was the best time either one of us had camping. We were there for about 7 days and well rested when we struck camp and headed back to the car. Our bodies were tired, but not our minds. I also managed to take back some geoid samples to break open at home. On our way back, we spotted those cougar tracks again. As we hiked back out and observed that the cat had to be about 250 pounds, and the cougar had tracked us for about 6 to 7 miles. It was a way greater distance than we thought. I would have never thought that it would have followed us for such a long way. 6 or 7 miles back would have placed its intrusion at or near Bear Gulch. It never bothered us. It probably could have, and lucky for us, it did not. It just observed our intrusion into its territory and probably didn't feel threatened. The cat had smelled our food. It might have even found the remains. It went up a hill at the same spot that it came down and was probably in a den safe somewhere. The creek we camped on played music. It was so perfect, and finally, I had to admit it came directly from nature. If we had heard vocals, I would say I was wrong, but we never heard any vocals. This type of phenomena was so odd and so cool at the same time that I will never forget it. Some of us are blessed with intuition, second sight, premonition, special abilities, and just plain luck by being in the right place at the right time. Some of us have had their eyes open to realize that this is a spiritual world. After this experience, I try not to rule out any phenomena that we can't explain right offhand, because no one can possibly be ready for such occurrences at all times to get proof. Sometimes you don't need any more proof. In my opinion, Nofus Creek in Trinity County, California, is the most interesting place I've ever been to and camped at, and I would like to again one winter. I was so amazed by this experience, I did some research and found when we returned to the city there was something to explain it. It's back at the library where I found and realized that the Gaia theory may have some merit to it. The Gaia hypothesis proposes that our planet functions as a single organism that maintains conditions necessary for its survival. It adapts life. At the time, I knew nothing about the Gaia theory till I looked for it. The Gaia theory, the Gaia hypothesis, interesting, states that basically the Earth is alive and its own collective organism. It insists the planet is alive with us included as part of itself. It states that it is mindful and conscious. That allows for it to be an organism, perhaps with a collective conscience. There is one other possibility. Could it be a parallel dimension to another Earth, where the veil suddenly between each dropped to be heard by us? There seemed to be a few possibilities. Perhaps the cloak was being manipulated, or were we really in God's country? Next, Chapter 3, Seasons of Change.